Welcome to part 2 of the Beat Sequencer Unity tutorial by PeerPlay. In this second part we are going to create a tapping system to set a new BPM during runtime. This tutorial is made possible by the support of the amazing patrons at my Patreon. Special thanks to Andrew Laboy, Devin the Dude and Fegter. We will start where we left off in the previous part. I showed you how to play some guitar sounds on the beat. In this part we're not going to use this, so let's remove these two game objects. We'll be creating some user interface for the tapping system, and I created these two sprites that we're going to use. Just as in the previous part, you can get these files for free at my Patreon. Look for the attachments at the post of this tutorial. We'll be adding the tapping system to the BPRM class, so let's open up that script. What we're going to make is that we can tap a certain key for 4 times during play mode, and by that we can set a new BPM. So let's create a few variables. And the first thing we'll create is a public float array, and we'll call this tap time. And it's going to be a new float of the length of 4. And in this tap time we'll store all the times that are in between of the taps. We also need to keep track of the amount of times that we have tapped, so let's create a public static integer and we'll call this tap. Now I'm going to make a system where we can enable or disable the system of tapping, so we're going to create a boolean for that. So public static bool custom beat. Now let's create a function called tapping. So underneath the update, we're going to type void tapping. And let's add the tapping to the update. Now first we're going to bind a key to enable the tapping. So we're going to type an if statement. So if input dot get key up, key code dot, and I'll just type here F1. So we need to press F1 to enable the custom beat. So if we press this key, the custom beat is becoming true, and we're going to set the current tap to 0. Now if the custom beat is true, so let's say an if statement, if custom beat is true, we're going to bind another key for the tapping. So if input dot get key down, so when we press down in that frame we'll get the key code dot, let's use the spacebar for this. We're going to set the tap time of the current tap to become the time dot real time since startup. And then we're going to add 1 to the tap. But we only want this to happen if the tap is under 4. So we're going to add another if statement, and we'll say if the tab is under 4, then we're going to do this. Now if the tab is equal to 4, we're going to get the average time in between of all of the different taps. So let's create a float and we'll call this average time, and that is going to be the tap time 1 minus the tap time 0, and we'll put this in parentheses, plus, let me copy paste this part, the tap time 2 minus the tap time 1, plus the tap time 3 minus the tap time 2. And let's put everything of this between parentheses as well. And we're going to divide this all by 3 to get the average. And with this average time, we can set the new BPM. So let's say BPM is going to be, and I want to round this number up to 2 digits after the comma. So we're going to cast this to a float, and I'll be using the system.math function .round. And this requires a double, but as the average time is a float, we're going to cast this to a double. So double of 60 divided by the average time. And after the comma, I can set the decimals that I want, so that'll be 2. Now we're going to set the tap to become 0. And in the frame that we hit the last tap, I want to start the timer of the beat. So we're going to reset everything. So we're going to reset the beat timer. That is going to be 0. The beat timer divided by 8 is going to be 0 as well. We're going to set the beat count full to become 0. And we'll set the custom beat to become false. Now that's all for the script, so let's save this script and go back to Unity. Now we're going to create a user interface to show the tapping and the BPM. So right click in the hierarchy, go to UI and select the canvas. What I often do is I go to the canvas scaler, I select the scale with screen size, and I'm changing this to 920 by 1080. Now in the scene view, let's go to 2D mode and zoom out so we've got the frame of the canvas. Now let's start by adding a text object to display the BPM. So right click on canvas, go to UI and select text. For the text, I want to use a different font than the default one. So to add a new font, if you're on Windows, go to the fonts folder and drag and drop the font you want to use into the assets. Let's position the UI text. So let's put it up to the corner here. Let's change the color to white. We're going to change the font to days. Let's make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. Place it in the center. So this will be our display for the BPM. So we're going to set the text to BPM. It's BPM. So let's create a new script on this text object. So we're going to type UI BPM. And let's open up that script. So as we're talking to a UI system, we need to be using Unity engine.ui. Now we can access the text class. So we're going to say text is text. And we'll get the component in the start of that. So we'll say text is get component text. Now the BPM value is a public float and not a static float, so we need to make a reference to the BPRM. So I'll call this BPRM. And in the update we're going to set the text, so we'll say text.text is going to be between parentheses what the text should be, BPM and a space there, plus the BPRM dot BPM dot toString. Now let's save this script and go back to Unity. Now we need to select our BPRM class. Well, let's see what it says here. It says 60 BPM, so if I run it, this should say BPM 60. Yes, that works. Let's also change the background of the camera. So let's go to camera and we'll set it to a solid color and I'll set it to black. Let's rename this text to BPM text. Now let's create the tapping UI. So what I'm going to do is on the canvas, going to create an empty. And I'm going to call this tapping. Now I'll make another empty game object that's a child of tapping and I'll call this UI. And on tapping we'll put a script that we can set the UI on or off. And that will be based on the boolean whether we're going to set a custom beat or not. Now let's create an image. So click on UI, go to UI and go to image. Let's set this image with a width of 160. Now go to source image and we're going to select the tap icon open. Now let's set the position. We're going to set the position at -400. Its pause position is going to be -225. And this is going to be tab 1. So let's create also for tab 2, 3, and 4. Now let's set the positions of all of the tab icons. So this one is going to be -75. This one's going to be 75. And this one's going to be 225. So what we're going to do is when we press F1, we can see all these icons. And if we then tap for the first time, then the first icon will become closed. So we can see the taps that we're doing. And once we've done all the taps, this will disappear again and it will set a new BPM. So let's change this back to open. Go to tapping and we're going to add a new script. And we'll call this script tapping UI. And let's open up the script. So again, we need to use the UI. So we'll type using Unity engine.ui. Now let's create a reference to the child object. So we're going to say a private transform is called UI. And in the start function, we're going to say that UI is going to be transform.getChild. And we want to get its first child. And in the start function, we're also going to say that this UI is going to be set to false. So we're going to say .gameObject.setActive is going to be false. Now we need to keep track of all of the different image components that we have on the tapping icons. So we'll create a private image, which is going to be an array, and we'll call this tap image. And we want to change the sprite of the component's image to either the close or the open sprite. So we need to make a reference to those sprites. So let's create a public sprite. And we'll call this sprite icon tap open and the icon tap close. Now for the image array, we're going to create a new array of the length of 4. So let's say in the start function tap image is a new image with the length of 4. Now let's do a for loop on the length of image and set all the components of image. So we'll do a for loop with the length to the tap image.length, and we're going to talk to tap image and the position in the array, and it's going to be the UI.getChild, because this is a child of the UI again. And we'll get the first child, or actually the child in the array dot get component, and we'll get the image component of that. Now let's also set the sprite to icon tap open. So we'll say tap image I dot sprite is going to be icon tap open. Now in the update, we're going to first check if the custom beat is true or false. If it's true, then we want to activate the UI. So let's do an if statement. If the bprm class dot custom beat is true, and we can get the custom beat because it's a static boolean. If that's true, then the UI dot its game object dot set active is going to be true. Now else, we're going to set the UI.gameObject.setActive is going to be false. Now if the custom beat is true, we're also going to check on which step we are so we can change the sprites of the images. So we'll do a for loop for int I is 0, I is less than the tap image dot its length, then I plus plus. Now in the BPM, we're keeping track of the amount of taps that we've done. So we can do an if statement if I of its current position is smaller than the BPM dot its tap amount. So if this current position in the array is lower than the tap amount, that means that this tap has been done. So we're going to set this tap image of its current position dot its sprite to become icon close. And else, we're going to say that this image is becoming icon tab open. Now let's save the script and go back to Unity. Now let's select the sprites, so go to UI, close, go in here, and open, go in here. Now the only thing that's missing is that we don't see anything happening yet or being controlled by the beat, but the system works, so if I go to play mode, then we can see it in action. So we've got a BPM of 60 at the moment, and when we press F1, we can start tapping. So I'm going to try to tap each second and see how close I can get to 60. So let's try 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi. Ooh, 59.05. That's pretty close. So that's working. So we can just type really fast and that'll be a very high BPM. That's it for this part. In the next part, I will show you how to create a simple visualizer using the BPM. But for now, thank you for following this tutorial. If you would like to get updated with new release tutorials, subscribe to the channel and turn notifications on. To support me creating these tutorials, you can become a patron at my Patreon. You then get access to the full course, source files and extra content.